Perfect. We're going to start on actually Samachay Amud Bet. We're going to go back to the Mishnah just so we have the Mishnah in our head, even though the Sugya we're going to learn only really involves the last, the very end of the Mishnah. But the whole Mishnah is related, as I'm sure we saw last time. So maybe we'll have someone read the Mishnah just to kind of get us on track here. A nice volunteer. Go for it, Yavni. I think that's a hand.
יין נסך שנפל על גב ענבים ידיחן והן מותרות. ואם היו מבוקעות אסורות. So, do you want me to translate or just go through it?
Give a quick summary. Yeah, it's doesn't have to be word for word.
So forbidden wine that falls on grapes, you push it away and then you can eat the grapes. You like wipe it away and then you can eat the grapes, but if the breaks are broken open, then you can't. Then they're forbidden. נפל על גב תאנים או על גבי תמרים, אם יש בהן בנותן טעם, אסור. So if it falls on figs or dates, if it has given taste, then they're asur. That's the question. ומעשה בביתוס בן זונן שהביא גורגרת בספינה ונשתברה חבית של יין נסך ונפל על גביהן ושאל החכמים והתירום. And then we have a particular story of a fig cake that got forbidden wine on it and it was permitted. זה הכלל, כל שבהנאתו בנותן טעם אסור, כל שאין בהנאתו בנותן טעם מותר. And this is the general rule. Anything that makes it, that is enjoyable, if it gives taste, then it's forbidden. And everything that's not enjoyable, if it gives taste, it's permitted. Even if it gives taste, permitted. If it's כגון חומץ שנפל על גב ריסין, and they give an example of vinegar that has gone on like some sort of porridge, I think.
Exactly, grits or something, whatever was the oatmeal of the day, I guess. But good. So really the major thing I just kind of want to draw out from this, without spending too much time, is I think for a lot of the shirim we've done up in here, we've talked about the question in the beginning of this Mishnah seems to be that, did it give tam, did it not? Can you get rid of the tam it gave? Now we've added this new factor, right? There's a case where it can give tam, but it's still mutar, at least per this Mishnah. What's that case?
When it's not bahanato, when it's not.
Exactly. It's not hana. By the way, as just a general, if just reading this Mishnah without anything else we've seen, what about, right, we know what the case is if it gives bahanato benoten tam, it's asur, all right? And ein bahanato benoten tam mutar, right? So if it's a neutral factor, how does this Mishnah rule? Which is like kind of a side piece. Like clearly if it tastes good, it's asur. What if it's neutral? And if
Hana is also more than just enjoyment or tasting good. It's also benefiting.
Great.
It's any kind of benefit.
Good. Say more.
So that makes it much more objective. I might hate the taste of it, but it makes something worth more money. I can sell it for more.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's a form of hana'ah.
That's not how I understand. I really like that statement. That's not how I understood the way you said it, though. I was thinking more like, and we'll see stuff like this. So go ahead. Whoever was talking right there. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, I think it also, like, from the Mishnah, it's ambiguous, and I think there's two pretty easy ways you could see it. Like, you could either say, well, because it says bahanato, if it were a neutral factor, that it's not like dafka improving the thing, then it would also be mutar. Or like the opposite thing of like dafka, and it's like, I don't think they use the language of Lifgam here yet, but like dafka when it's like negative and you wish it weren't there. Like, not just that it's neutral, but like you would prefer the Isur not be existent, it's mutar. But when it's like, I could care less, like it's fine that it's here, it's fine that it's not, then that's still Asur. Like, it seems from the Mishnah like you could go either way with that. Great.
I understood, kol she'ein b'hanato b'noten tam mutar as like, if I'm not getting any hana from it, who cares if it doesn't do anything bad, right? But that's an interesting way to understand it. And also it's a great point, right? That we never see the word hagum here, right? There's no sense yet. We're going to see that though. And also like just I think it was Asher's point earlier of, we will see, of course, not necessarily here, but, it might be different if I might not like the taste of it, but it looks really nice presentably, or it's be'ayin, or there's something here where it's actually pagum, or it's pogem, but there still is some other benefit to it. It could be like, it's interesting, it uses the word hana'a, it doesn't just say noten tam lifgam. So just leave those factors. And maybe just I'll open it for like any last comments on the Mishnah before we kind of push on to the Gemara. Okay, great. Shani, did you have anything you wanted to throw in there that I missed?
Nope.
Okay,
You did great.
so if we could all go to Samach Zayin Amud Aleph. 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 5 lines if I still know how to count from the top. And we'll start with a quote of the Mishnah. And maybe we can get a volunteer to read. We're going to rely heavily on this person. Maybe I'll get 2 volunteers. I'll get one person to volunteer for the Gemara for the moment, one person to volunteer to be Rashi for the moment when I need Rashi, which we always need Rashi. So. Nobody, no brave souls. Yavni, are you still down for? All right, you're going to be the Gemara.
Sure.
And can I get one person to volunteer to be Rashi to read Rashi when we get there?
I can rush it.
All right, great, Josh, perfect. All right, so start with the quote from the Mishnah, Yavni, and then we'll keep going. So.
זה הכלל, כל שבהנאתו בנותן טעם וכולי. אמר רב יהודה, אמר שמואל, הכי הלכתה.
Good place to stop. Yeah, go. Yeah, explain it, and then we'll figure that out.
So Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says that is indeed the halacha.
Good. What?
What?
Wait, what's the halacha?
What's the halacha? Kol shebananto benoten ta'am?
Presumably. What does Rashi say?
That.
It's
noten ta'am lifgam mutar.
Great.
Yeah.
So, all right. Which, by the way, I think the
almost
fact
that.
that Rashi has to jump in there. And the first time, I don't know about how you guys felt. The first time I read this, before I looked at the Rashi, which is sometimes a good way to read Gemara first without the Rashi, is like, what is this? What's the halacha? And it's not so clear. And Rashi helps us figure that out. And he also changes the language nicely for us. Like he's introducing that the kol shebahanato, right? Kol she'en behanato mutar is a case of tam lifgam, which we didn't necessarily, if we didn't ever have the language of tam lifgam, I don't know if it was mukhrach to understand the Mishnah that way, but this is the way the Gemara is going to understand the Mishnah. So,
how do you think Rashi understands the word hanato, not ein hanato, the opposite, in other words, the converse?
I think he means that it's not pagum, and therefore it's the opposite of what I was saying before. I think what Lexi was saying, the other way to read the Mishnah, if I remember correctly, right? That's exactly how Rashi reads it. If it's pagum, it's mutar. If it's anything but, then it's asur.
Well, hanato has to have some hana.
That's the pshat of the Mishnah, but Rashi is reading within the direction the Gemara takes the Mishnah, which is to talk in terms of pagam. He flips the language as the Gemara flips the language to speak.
But what's
from
the opposite?
negative.
What term would you say is the opposite of pagam?
Sheva.
Yeah, the opposite is sheva, but it's the case of like the not pagam, right? And it ends up with a neutral case actually.
You're saying it could be neither pagam nor sheva.
Exactly.
This is Rashi Leshitato, right? In the Mishnah, he comments and he turns hanato into noten tam l'shevach, and here he brings it into noten tam l'fgam. He's using his vocabulary.
That's great. I really appreciate that point. It's so good. All that with 2 words from Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. So keep going, Yavne.
ואמר רב יהודה אמר שמואל לא שענו אלא שנפל לתוך גריסין רותחין, אבל נפל לתוך גריסין צוננין, והרתיחן נעשה כמי שהשביח ולבסוף פגם ואסור. So another statement from the same folks clarifying the particular example, which is the vinegar falling into the oatmeal and apparently vinegar only is damaging to oatmeal when the oatmeal is hot. And so it clarifies that if you put vinegar in the oatmeal when the oatmeal is cold and then you heat it up in order for the vinegar such that the vinegar then does damage, then it's still asur.
Great. So first off, it's very important to what have we introduced at this point?
Now we've introduced the language of gam and shevach.
Yeah, and something else too, like a factor that we didn't have before.
The heat.
Well, also the time factor,
Good.
right? That it's
Yeah.
not just about if it's immediately pagam, or if it immediately, one thing, if it's like l'shevach at all, even if it later becomes bad, then it's out there.
Great. Yeah, that's is the whole question of time, right? What if things change over time, and they change as you cook them, as Yavni put it. So how does that play in? But it's very interesting. I just found it interesting too that it's Rav Yehuda or Shmuel says this is the halacha is like the Mishnah, which usually is not something we need clarification on, by the way, right? Usually the halacha just follows the Mishnah. Usually there are exceptions, right? But, and it's a pretty big but, but it depends, when it's pagum. It has to start out pagum. It can't be like that. It started out nicely and then it became pagum later. So, and also it's very important to know that vinegar in your oatmeal is tasty. That is universal knowledge. So, all right. Any other thoughts on that before we're going to get a whole bunch of reports on similarly?
Wait, vinegar in your oatmeal is tasty if it's...
Oh, if it's cold. Sorry. Yes, if it's cold. Yeah, not if it's hot. I apologize. Cold oatmeal and vinegar is apparently tasty. So, this is, which also, I mean, keep going and I'll talk about regional things in a moment. So keep going, Yavni.
V'chen ki ata, this is a very affirmative passage. V'chen ki ata rabin amar Rabba bar Chana amar Rabbi Yochanan lo shanu ela shenafal לתוך גריסין רותחין אבל נפל לתוך גריסין צוננין והרתיחן נעשה כמי שהשביח ולבסוף פגם ואסור. וכן כי ata רב דימי וכולי וכך היו עושים בערבי שבתות בציפורי, וקוראים אותן שכליים. And so we have affirmation from another source of the same argument, and then additional affirmation that indeed it's tasty to put vinegar into cold grits, because that's what they would do on Erev Shabbat in Tzipori. And they even had a name for this dish.
Yeah.
Quick, reading note. Did anyone look up the phrase "v'chein ki ata"?
Yeah, it's like when someone came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel in this case, right?
Right. So this is a very active illustration of coming from one of our major centers, moving to another, and explaining here's the way things are over there, and sort of harmonizing or challenging the way we read the law based on that sort of cultural exchange.
From what little I've seen in the past, usually when they bring an example, this is what we do in Bavel, and say, but when so-and-so came from Eretz Yisrael, usually it's giving a different theme. This seems rare in that they're saying, look how universal this is.
Yeah, this is b'nichuta, right? You have Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, right? But you have Rav Yehuda sitting there in Bavel quoting this, and then you have reports from Eretz Yisrael coming, potentially, often with Rav Dimi and Ravim, probably in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, although he's not quoted here, and saying, yeah, that's how we do things in Eretz Yisrael too. We have this. We know that mashpiach ufagam is asur, and second of all, that actually we know this is even the case with vinegar and greasing. So.
Do we understand from this that in Bavel they didn't commonly eat it? They just had the wisdom that it was an improvement, but in Eretz Yisrael they actually did eat it.
That was my personal guess about this, but was that maybe in Bavel, I don't know what they someone who could do maybe a PhD on the diet of like the breakfast diet in Bavel, but I don't know. So maybe somebody.
It would seem they do eat it. Just they're not talking about just vinegar bichlal. They're talking about vinegar tznesech.
that vinegar that's they,
So they know vinegar tastes good. You know, you're allowed to as long as it's not nesech.
yeah,
It's not a problem.
they seem to the fact that they need reports from Eretz Yisrael about whether or not
about the nesech, about the situation of when it's nesech.
No,
No,
it's not nesech there.
no, yeah, I've never
No,
once.
it's just about whether it tastes good in
Yeah.
this greasy dish, which they seem like they had chomets, but it's not clear that they ate it in greasing.
Mm-hmm.
In order to understand whether if chometz that's yayin nesech, that's nesech fell in my grisine, if now I can eat that, I first have to assess, well, at what point does chometz and grisine taste good, and at what point does chometz and grisine taste bad, which is then how we get the report of in different communities, at what point in their cooking process do they put in chometz, and at what point it would be considered disgusting. Does that clarify, Asher?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
But good. I could see a way that we could actually argue it, like maybe that they knew they had cases where actually it happened and somebody declared it was asur, versus it never happened in Bavel, whether or not they actually had to bring the case as a maseh. But yeah, let's keep. So we have all that. We've got this background of if it starts out lishvach, it ends up pagum. That is asur. And I think I just want to introduce before we get to the next case is maybe the question of what if it's pagum, but there's a way to make it l'shevach, right? It's the kind of like the flip in time, that it starts bad, but it could go good, could go well, whatever the right word is. Well, so Yavni, take us with Resh Lakish.
אמר ריש לקיש, נותן טעם לפגם, שאמרו לא, שאמרו לא, שאמרו קדרה.
I would reread it as Resh Lakish, נותן טעם לפגם שאמרו.
Oh, okay. אמר ריש לקיש, נותן טעם לפגם שאמרו, לא שאמרו קדרה זו חסרה מלח, יתרה מלח, חסרה תבלין, יתרה תבלין, אלא כל שאין חסרה כלום ואין הנאכלת מפני זה. So this is, yeah. So Rish Lakish says that it's like it has to be that noten tam nifgam, like that they said that this thing gave decreased the tastiness of the food. Not that they said, oh, I put this in and now this dish is lacking salt or has too much salt or lacking spice or has too much spice. Rather, everything else was fine about the dish, and this particular thing that you added, which was the forbidden thing, made it either not palatable or other people soften the language, like the commentator softened the language of
Good, we'll get to that Rashi in a second, but that's great, right? It's Shani and I were thinking of a case where you imagine you add, you have like a perfectly spiced soup and you add some chicken broth to it that's not kosher chicken broth, and it's not that it necessarily makes it bad, but you can imagine that it it changed the spice ratio and I now need to go add some more spices, or it made it too spicy, I need to go add some more water, right? This version of Reish Lakish sounds, and we'll look at the Rashi, but sounds like that's a sore. You can't say like, oh, now I need to go, keep working in the kitchen, therefore it's pagum, therefore I can eat the soup, no problem. Reish Lakish says no. In this,
in all these cases, is pagum that the thing that it's putting in essentially pagum, or is it that only its relationship to the food has an effect on the final product?
Yeah, it sounds, well, maybe I'll open it before I say what it's to other people.
It really seems to be the latter, because the fact that we even have the idea of l'shevach and then lifgam implies that these aren't all things that inherently are just going to be gross no matter what. They're things that can be good in some cases, and in some cases they're bad. Also, in this case that Reish Lakish is bringing, I think the chicken soup stock is a really good example, but I think he's also saying even if the Isser itself he wanted to clarify if the rest of the pot, you had a thing that you just didn't season very well, and also there's Isser in it, and now you're this isn't seasoned so well, I don't love this, that doesn't count. The fact that you don't love how this dish turned out, it's not mechamat isur, and so that doesn't matter.
Right.
Right.
The not loving is the criteria, but in this case, the not loving is because of external factors,
Yeah.
not because of the new ingredient of Isser.
Yeah.
But
That's
the ultimate arbiter is whether I love this thing or I don't.
But
well, in this
I
case,
do.
in this case, it's not, right? In this case, it's not the, I could not love it, but if I could fix it, it might be, it's still asur in this version of it.
I just want to note, Lexi, that what I think that's true, but what Rish Lakish is suggesting is something even stronger, which is that even if the Isser itself affected the dish such that you like it less, right? It has to affect it in a way that is like essential to the Isser itself. So I put in the chicken broth. Now my dish is saltier than I want it to be. But that's not a good criteria for naming the thing pagum, even though that is actually something that you caused from adding the Isser itself. See what I'm saying?
Wait, sorry, Shani, you and Joel, I feel like we're saying something similar, but could you explain where you see that in the Gemara?
Where I see
that if it can be fixed by adding some spice or salt, or then it doesn't count as, then it's asul, and
yeah. So it's right, Yetira melech chasera melech, right? So say I added, I think the chicken broth is complicated because that's actually an addition of salt, which is harder to fix, right? But say I knocked in some chicken juice.
Right.
And actually, it was perfectly spiced before. And now, actually, in order for this to be really nice to serve to my guests, it needs a half teaspoon more salt.
Or water. Yeah. Maybe it got too strong.
Yeah.
The reason that I initially read this as being about like the rest of the dish, not even how this necessarily interacts with it, is because like Rashi uses language of like davar acher. And it seems like if we're saying that the Isser itself is what's causing the like saltiness or non-flavoredness, that doesn't seem so clearly distinguished from the Isser makes it gross. Like, I guess that's where you're getting the tikkun, but because Rashi didn't mention the language of tikkun, I assumed that like it's more about like something else in the dish is imperfect and makes me not want to eat it, and the Isser doesn't really affect that, versus the Isser is the thing that's causing the upset, because otherwise it feels like a more blurry line between like what's gross and what's like not ideal.
But I know I assigned Josh to read the Rashi, but do you want to read the Rashi for us? There's two Rashis here, that just so we can see that inside. I have to find the Diburei Matchil just to get everyone on the same page. Is Lo Sheyomru v'chulei, and then through Ela and Kol She'ena Chasera. So three Rashis.
So lo she'amru v'chulei, chumra hi, klomar, lo she'yochlu l'tetz pagam b'tavshil mechamat davar acher, k'gon shetehei chaser hamelech o yetera, zim nifka mechamat davar acher, in tolin ha-pagam b'isur v'asur. So like that was the language I was talking about with like davar acher, which I can also see how that would just be reading as like davar acher as opposed to like the ickiness of this versus just like the saltiness of the thing in general, but that's how I got the reading I arrived at. And then Ella izahutam lifgam shmutar. Yeah, like what's the like negative flavor that's permitted? Kol she'ena chasera shum tikun ve'ena ne'achelet mifnei zeh klomar be'isur zeh pogem tama.
And stop there for a moment. Yeah.
And so this is the language of tikkun, but that's why I assumed like it's Eina Chasera tikkun is in the thing before the Isser is added. So like that too, the idea of like any dish that would have been totally, I would have been happy to eat it before the Isser came, and then the Isser came and that's dafka why I won't eat it. That's why it's not great. That's the case where it's mutar.
I feel like it's a really compelling argument. I was reading Rashi differently, and I was kind of putting more emphasis on the third Rashi, I guess it is there, where I was seeing it as, right, there's no tikkun. But you're right. It sounds like actually the way he's reading the beginning of it is that it's like the pagum is from something else, right? He says machmat davar acher, and so it's a great point.
Yeah, I think that actually our read of this first Reish Lakish may be influenced by sort of our relating to it as an inverse of the next Reish Lakish. So let's come back to that after we've read the second piece.
And then the last line of this is just what Yavni was talking about with the softening,
Great.
where he's like, you know, and I think like it seems like what's motivating him to say this is if it's like dafka in an what does this even matter to us? Like if you would literally never eat it, how is it like relevant that it's mutar? So he's like, it's not that it's totally inconsumable, it's that like it doesn't taste great. Like you would eat it if you had to.
Yeah, I was also wondering if because like the case here is a case of we're not saying it's a case where you need to add spice or take away spice or add that we're talking about. Rashi I think picks up on the idea that the difference that we're talking between the two versions of Reish Lakish in general, we're talking about cases where it's lacking or needing something. We're not talking about this is like destroyed it. Like there's a chance that you could fix this with, you know, what's in your cabinet right now, and not a case where this thing is just completely gone. So.
Yeah, and I want to just note that we'll come back to this Einan Chelet and what might be motivating Rashi. Lexi, I think that's like a good working wondering. But I also think we should just like offer up as we're thinking about why it is this would be mutar in the first place, and to note, like, if we're to take a Shabbat analogy, right? When we talk about like things that are mutar to do, often we talk about them because they're not really doing anything. Right? Oh, like that's not malacha because it's not actually an action, and therefore it's mutar. And I think there is a similar tendency within this text here to say, like, if it's so inedible, like if it really doesn't taste good such that no one wants to eat it, fine, eat it. And so that I want to leave that as a live possibility of what Notin Time Gam actually does mean. But if that's the case, then we have to ask, why does Rashi want to clarify that in an echelot piece? So we'll come back to it.
All right, with that, Yavni, you still,
Sure.
You're still on the screen. All right, so version 2 of Reish Lakish.
ואיכא דאמרי, אמר ריש לקיש נותן טעם לפגם, נותן טעם לפגם שאמרו, אין אומרים קדרה זו חסרה מלח יתרה מלח חסרה תבלין יתרה תבלין, אלא השתמיה הפגמה. So let me try to remember how this works. So the second version says that so it says that you can't say like, it's similar to the previous one, but it's instead of saying it's that you can't say, oh, I added this thing and also this soup has something wrong with it. Rather you have to say like, regardless of the other things in the soup, this isur thing that I added is ifgam. So the way I understood the first one and the second one as being distinct had nothing to do with whether or not you could fix it with something else, but rather had to do with the distinction is that in the first one, if you can, it's the question of if there's multiple things wrong with the soup. If there's both too much salt and you added some isur thing that's making it taste bad, then can you say this thing is making it taste bad and therefore it's mutar, or can you not? And in the first case, if there's anything else damaging the soup, then you assume the soup is damaged and you can't put any blame on the other thing. And in the second version of Reish Lakish, it's the Mekil one, and it says if there is anything else wrong with it, it's you can't. It's the only restriction it's putting is it's saying you can't say there's something wrong with the soup and therefore it's okay that I added isur. You just have to be able to say the isur itself did some damage, even if there's other damage going on to the soup.
That's really interesting that you're told. I read it differently. You're told the whole thing on, is there another thing? The both opinions of Reish Lakish are, was there another thing causing the pagam, right?
Right.
And in the first version, if I understand you correctly, even if something else is causing the gam, it's asur because it wasn't the isur that was causing the
right.
pagam. And in the second version, it's like if it's pagam, it's pagam. It doesn't matter what caused it, right? And
no, I don't think so. I think I think the second one is not saying that it's pagam and therefore it's mutar. It's saying like, you still, even if there's other pagam, you still have to be able to say that this is noten pagam.
Oh, interesting. And that's in the second version? And that's
In the
like,
second version.
Oh, that's not how, okay. I'll leave it for the moment. It's interesting. It's an interesting read. I have to think about that one. I mean, I read it as essentially like I read it as a time factor still, and I don't think it necessarily has to be read that way. We'll look at the Rashi of like the first version of Rish Lakish says like it right now is pagum, but can it be fixed? And that's what we determine it based on. In other words, it's pagum, but it's yachol le'ashbiach, right? Is the case we're working on, and in the first version, that's asur. The second version is like it's. I keep thinking we're coming up on Hashem Bakaretzara is like the whole thing with Ishmael Basheru Sham. Like, what is it like now? I don't care if in the future it can be better. Right now, it's in this case, it's bad, and therefore it's mutar. Is the way I read it. But I actually I think it's an interesting read of like not seeing it necessarily as a time, but seeing it all about the another factor. So do people understand what the distinction there? I want to make sure I'm being clear. I may not be.
Great. I mean, I think and again, we can look at the Rashis in this one, but I don't think it's talking about time in this one either, but it does have the language of tikkun again. Like here, I think it's more about like, what if this had been seasoned the way it was supposed to, the Isser factor wouldn't have been pagam.
Great.
So like katiknuha, not that like there is a tikkun or isn't. It's like if this had been as it was supposed to be, the Isser like wouldn't have been pagam, and we're like we don't care about that. If it is pagam, nonetheless, like.
Yeah, that's it. You know, it's interesting. I think I'm rethinking how I'm reading this. I was very committed to because of the beginning of this sugya is about time. To see the second part of the sugya about time, and I think I'm thinking as we get to the Rebbe Yochanan, I may think that your reading might be better actually than mine, but for the moment we'll leave it out in the air. But I do want Lexi, you want to read the next Rashis for us too, just since you started to finish up Reish Lakish here, and we're starting with the V'ika de Amre is the Dibur Matchil and Rashi, about like halfway down, almost not quite halfway down the Rashi on this stuff. Go for it.
V'ika de Amre had the Reish Lakish l'kula. So there's like a different version of Reish Lakish that's a bit of a more makel statement. כלומר, אין תולין הפגה בדבר אחר, כלומר, חסר היא מלך, ואילו הייתה כתיקונה, לא היה זה האיסור פוגמה, שהמלך היה מבטל את פגימתם האיסור מתקנו, אלא כיוון דתם האיסור פוגמה עכשיו, כמות שהיא הווה פגם ומותר. Right, so like, don't say that it's like, Intalin pagam b'davar acher, like we don't say that we don't tolin the pagam b'davar acher in the kula case, that like we allow for there to be other factors influencing this. That like if one says this is like kind of lacking salt, and if it were at the right amount of salt, this like isur thing wouldn't have made it gross, and the melech would have like gotten rid of that flavor. That doesn't matter because like as it is, it's gross and that or not tasty, and that's what we care about, and it's mutar.
Great.
Not just that as it is, it's gross, but as it is, it's gross because at least partially because of the isur, right?
Well, no, but here it's the opposite of that. Here, this is the kula version, right? He's not emphasizing that it's partially because of the isur. It's that like there's a way in which this isur could have not even been pagam.
It could have not caused damage, but as it is, it did cause damage. So we don't care.
It did cause damage, but I think that's not the emphasis here. I think the emphasis here, at least especially the way Rashi is portraying it, as he's like, this is Ika Damre, like the kula. His emphasis is like in either case, there is some impact that the Devar Asur is having. But here, the emphasis is on the fact that like it doesn't have to be just the Devar Asur. There can. I
agree that that's the contrast with the previous case. I just think it's still a condition.
Yeah,
necessary condition.
In other words, the question is: does the isur itself have some bad impact, or is it just like I was in the middle of my cooking process, like this thing in front of me is still in an awful state. There's no way anybody would eat it. I drop in some chicken juice. The chicken juice almost doesn't matter in that case. You know, that's like an extreme reading of it. But it's like this thing is just bad where it is right. At the point when I added the Isur, it was in a bad state, whether or not it was because of the Isur or not. And
I just want to emphasize that that's not Rashi's reading. The word Rashi says, lo hayazeh, right? Lo hayazeh Isur pogma. No, it's right. Right? Shamelech hayam mevatel et pigimat tam ha'isur. The emphasis is on the isur does give a ta'am pogem to this mixture. The question is there something I could have done theoretically to balance it out? Even if there is something I could have done to balance it out, it's that we still consider that Isur is giving tam lifgam to the mixture, and therefore my mixture is pagum.
Yeah, I think
Rashi's focus is on the Isur giving that initial pagam.
Sorry, someone was jumping in there.
I was just going to say that thing of if there is something you could have done. I think where the time factor comes in is that it doesn't matter whether that thing is before the Isur thing was added or after. So it doesn't matter if you're making a cake and you already added a little too much salt. Now the cake would still be fine with that little bit too much salt, but now when you add the Isur vinegar, the vinegar and the salt don't mix well. Or the case of you add the vinegar and you could balance it out with a little more salt, but either one of those cases I think would fall into Rashi.
Yeah.
And either one of those cases by the first Reish Lakish would be still Isur.
Asur. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's a great way to put it. There's actually there is a spectrum in the Rashi there, right? That you can, it could be that the thing itself caused the pikima, or in both cases it caused the pikima, but it's all about that thing, or it could be that it's that thing because of where you are in the process right now that it caused it. But great. I think so good. I think we've kind of done a nice job of kind of tearing apart the different possibilities here in the Reish Lakish. And so we end up with two versions. I just want to make sure we get that summary with two versions of Reish Lakish. We have no clear indication yet which one is the correct version, if there is a correct version. But one is definitely, as Rashi puts it, L'chumra, one is L'kula. And now we have, of course, if we have Reish Lakish, we have to have Rabbi Yochanan weigh in as well. So Yavni, go for it.
Yeah, wait, hang on. אמר אבאו אמר רבי יוחנן, כל שטעמו וממשו אסור, לוקין.
Read velokin alav.
ולוקין עליו.
I'll explain why in a second, yeah.
וזהו כזית בכדי אכילת פרס.
Stop there.
Paras.
Yeah.
So we have a statement from Rabbi Yochanan that everything that has both the taste and the substance of an asur thing. Everything that is both taste and substance is forbidden, and you get lashes for it. And that is assuming that you have eaten a kazait worth in the amount of time that it takes to eat half a loaf of bread.
Great, you've already interpreted achilat pras, but that's good. I like half a loaf of bread. So just a very quick note before we get into what tamo mamasho is. The velokin, Shani and I actually looked. You can go. I think it's your Hebrew University that they have the different. You can look at manuscripts of the Gemara. I do a Google search on Girsot Shel Gemara, and that's where I find it. But and every manuscript out there has velokin. And if you look, I have a note in Mesorat Shas on the side of my Gemara. It says Tzarich Lomar velokin. Okay, so good. What is Rabbi Yochanan saying? Kol shetamo mashu asur velokin alav means what?
I think maybe it helps to see it in the context of the later statements, but
probably useful to finish.
Means it's doraita. Means it's
right, but potentially there's a punishment for it, right? That you get, there's a punishment for eating that. But how much do you have to eat? You have to eat, right? A kazait in the amount of time it would take you to eat a pras, right? So, which are a really. We'll look at the Rashi in a second. I just want to just from a practical halacha point of view, I've seen I know people here have looked this up. I've seen the time of Kedei Achilat Pras be anywhere from 3 to 12 minutes. So I don't know what anybody else here has seen. or if there's like a standard that people go by here. But it's a pretty big, and this comes up, we'll see in a second in the Rashi, like for all, cases of achila, like for instance with Yom Kippur coming up, if somebody like, Chas v'shalom, they need to eat on Yom Kippur, but they don't want to, they still want to be at least fasting, that if you eat less than kazait in kedei achilat pras, you actually have you're not allowed to do that lechatchila, but you actually haven't eaten anything per the rules of halachically of eating at that point. So, good. So maybe we'll look. I want to see. Look at a little. I'm trying to look conscious of time. Yeah. I'm going to skip the Rashi for the moment. Let's finish the Rabbi Yochanan, unless somebody has a comment on the first half of it. And maybe we'll have a little time for the Tosfot, but I'm actually doubting that at this moment too. Shani warned me.
I think you have time for the Tosfot, Joel.
You think I have time for the? All right.
But don't do it yet. Finish the phrase.
Don't do it yet. Great. You have to keep reading. Let's get the second part of Rabbi Yochanan on Daf Samach Zayin Amud Bet.
טעמו ולא ממשו אסור ואין לו כן עליו, ואם ריבה טעם לפגם מותר. So if it has the taste and not the substance, it's forbidden, but you don't get lashes for it. And if it added to the flavor to its detriment, then it is allowed.
Yeah, great. Did you read that part in the language? I don't remember.
Sorry?
I don't remember if you read. Did you read Ve'im riba tam lifkam mutar?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, you did. Okay, great.
Did my microphone not pick it up? Yeah, I did.
No, my head just didn't pick it up. It's okay.
ולמה אם נתן טעם לפגם מותר, כמשמלן, דאף על גב, דאיכא מילי. Sorry, did you want to say anything about that, or should I?
No, I just wanted to make you read it differently, but keep going. It was pretty good. I just wanted to push it a little bit.
Wait, I didn't hear?
I just wanted to make it, right? All right. Velema, right? This is the Gemara coming in. Velema im natan.
Velema.
Right? It should have said this. Why did he say? Why he should have said that? Why did he say? Why didn't he say that?
Okay.
Hakamash Malan.
ולמה אם נתן טעם לפגם מותר, הקמש מלן, דאף על גב דאיכא מילי אחרנייתא דפגמה בהדיא והלכתה כלישנא.
Behade, by the way.
Behade, thank you. והלכתה כלישנא.
Behade, and that's.
Behade, oh, sorry. Thank you.
So.
And I'm not remembering this. And it should just say, why does it need to say
Natan?
And it's wondering why
it should have said Natan.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Natan instead. It should have said Natan instead of riba. And we understand it that it's that even if there is something else that is also damaging it, as long as it's adding to the damage, it's mutar.
Good. I just want to, if you don't mind, I'm going to translate it inside a little bit more, just like to get the words right. Right. The Gemara says, right, he should have said, Velema, Rabbi Yochanan should have said, if it natan tam lifgam, as Josh pointed out, if it gives a tam lifgam, not riba tam lifgam, why does he have to say riba tam lifgam? What's going on?
Right.
Hakamash Malane, it teaches us, right, that even if there's some other thing that is also damaging with it, and these words are missing in the Gemara, we just assume them, it is also mutar, right? Which is they're existent in the Rabbi Yochanan, right, not in the Gemara's reread or explanation of Rabbi Yochanan. So, right, which teaches us Rabbi Yochanan, right, we've had this whole debate going on with Reish Lakish about, how about another factor? And so here it says, if it's already pagum and this adds to the to being pagum, it's still mutar,
So it's like the Mikil version of it.
Yeah. So I want to go back. Let's actually look at the 248. All right. Let's look at the Rashis on top of this page on the Rabbi Yochanan, and then we'll see if we have a little bit of time for the beginning of that Tosfot there. So Josh, you want to? I cut you off from being our Rashi for a while, so I'm going to bring you back to that.
No worries. Which one? Tamo v'lo mamasho?
Yeah, Tamo v'lo mamasho.
כגון חלב שנפל לקטרה,
Yeah.
או חלב שנפל נימוח שאין ממשו בעין.
Great.
Okay, so
I think it's, by the way, it's chalav in the first case.
it's
This is
chalav.
Tosfot. Yeah, this is where Tosfot's gonna flip out about this Rashi, but let's
Okay.
it's chalav in the first case and chalev in the second. I'm pretty sure, and I'll explain why I think that. But
Okay. So it's like milk that fell into a pot, or forbidden fat that melted in, and its essence, its substance is lost.
it's not visible. I would say is probably gonna be a good way to translate that. Right? You can't see it. Right? It's liquid form and mixed in, and therefore it's like lost in the mixture in some ways. I would say, which is an important idea, right? What is tamo v'lo masho? What is tamo v'ma masho? Right? Is not only is there taste of it, there's like some physical substance there that you could identify as isur. I would say is I think what Arashi is saying. Like I could say there's the isur, it's in there, and here we don't have that anymore. But the reason I think it's by the way chalav, right? Because he has to explain in the second half that it's chalev nimoach that melted, which sounds like stam chalev is solid still and visible. And therefore, I think that it's got to be a liquid form like chalav in the first half of the statement. So.
But we talk about chalav being nimuach though, like fat. The idea that it can be like dissolved pretty easily.
Good. Yeah, I agree. I just the fact that Rashi has to say it out in the second half of the Rashi makes me think that the first half he's not talking about that. And I think the Tosfot initially get that as well and then are shocked by it. But if people saw the Tosfot on the previous stuff. So
right. I think what's useful about sort of thinking about both the examples of chalav and the example of chalev is that it's not clearly just something that is liquid or always liquid. That actually there can be a form of something that is not solid, but has sort of changed its form to be liquid form. But it may be useful to think in terms of particles, meaning what form are the particles in? Is it in particle form, or is it in sort of solid form where I can see it as a mass?
Great.
But when we think of tamo, we think of the substance not being there.
Yes.
But that does not seem that here the substance is really there. I mean, modern people, I think it's the difference between modern and medieval thinking. Modern people would say it's there. It's just hard to see it. It's hard to find it, but it's there. And Rashi's saying no, that's just called tam.
Yeah.
Even though there's actual fat there, there's actual milk there, that's just called tam. Because it's not what would be mamasho would be an actual hunk of cheese or
a solid piece of something.
Rav Nachum, modern people make us say empirically.
Yeah, empirically there is. You put it in a centrifuge, you might be able to get out.
We don't need particles. We just need empirically. Yeah. That's how we cook. You cook empirically.
Yeah. I think it would be an interesting question, which may already be in the Rashi there a little bit, of like, what if it changes the way it looks? Like that also may just be tamo and not mama show, right? If it,
Right. Mare can be relevant though, actually.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. That's why it's, I think, a different.
Mare is a different, is you're getting into a can of worms there,
I am intentionally.
Yeah, so. that's a whole nother question. Would you still say in that case that it's not there? If you could see it, but you don't see anything in particular, you just see its coloring effect.
Yeah.
Do you want for dinner mamish, a piece of meat?
Exactly. Yeah.
Mamish. You want a Mashiach who's mamish? You want a piece of meat that's mamish, didn't you?
Right. Some of my vegetarian guests will eat a potato that was cooked in the chicken. Because there's no mamish chicken there. There's just flavor. But there's bits of fat.
As a vegetarian who wouldn't eat your potato right now, but in all seriousness, I think I would offer that like tam ki ikar, which is, I'm cheating, we haven't seen that phrase yet, but ta'amo umamasho asur velokina lav, what we have seen, is a way of saying, but like just ta'amo is still asur, is a way of saying, even though I can't see it, it is still there. So in other words, I actually think that the ancients had a way to say it's not there, but it is. Like I know it's there, even though like I don't have a microscope that could see its particles. And the way they express that is that it's the ta'am is there. What they mean is it's there. It's just in a form that is microscopic.
I feel like it's like kind of like lichatchila, many vegetarians, myself as well as Shani included, would not eat either the mama show or the thing that had been cooked in it. But like if I had accidentally eaten a piece of meat, I would go like spit it out or something or wash my mouth out. Whereas like if I accidentally ate like potatoes that were cooked in the same like general space as chicken, I'd be like, that wasn't great. And then
I think
but Shani's point is well taken. That it's usser.
Yeah.
That it's usser.
Right. Which I think Lexi was saying, like she wouldn't go lechatchila go do that, but she wouldn't go like be loka herself after.
I think that's the Rebbe Yochanan to some extent, right? Is that on one hand, like you can't eat the tam, right? That's asur, but there is a distinction between the actual piece itself and the tam, right? Which is a big question we're going to get in halacha is, this question of tam ki kar, that the tam is like the original source thing, shall we say, like the actual thing itself. Is it really like it, or is it like it on a lower level, shall we say? Are the two exactly the same thing? And I ate, the taste, the flavor of chicken, because flavor is so important here. Is that the same thing as just eating this unkosher chicken? Well, chicken's unkosher chicken, we'll call it that. Like, shechita wasn't done right. It's an avela or something like that. I ate their treifa chicken. Is that the same as eating the thing itself? Or is that, it's asur, but it's not quite the same level of like, I actually just took this, treifa chicken and took a bite out of it.
Wait, so I have two comments. There's still two more comments.
Put it together.
Oh, one is when what is mutter then? If tamo is usser, what's mutter?
I mean, well, never having it is, but if it's pagum, and that's the
if it's pagum, or batel, or what?
Or batel, the tam's not there anymore.
Or for those who were here last week, if it's not tam, what's one lower level than tam?
It's a sen.
Right? Oh, reach halav miltahi, right?
Reach. In other words, the tam will be usser any tam, but the reach that'll be with. Mm-hmm. And so that's my first comment.
Depending on how you hold.
Depending how you hold. But I'm informed by the Shulchan Aruch.
But if you think about it conceptually, it's like visible, microscopic, influence, but not there at all. That could be the three levels.
Right. Oh, interesting.
Well, visual is going to become pretty much that it's there. But so my second comment is what's according to Rashi, and this is going to bring you into Tosfos maybe. According to the Rashi, what's the shear? In other words, it's tamo mamasho. There's some fat there, but it has. You can taste it. It's enough to taste it. So the shear is 1 in 60, let's say, or whatever, enough to taste it. But that's not the shear I'm talking about. Once you've got that mixture, how much of it do you have to eat to get this whipping? Is it a mashu or is it a kazayit?
Yeah, it sounds like it's a kazayit, right? That's
why?
Number one, that's what Reish Lakish says. Hold on, I'm on the wrong daf. But Rashi himself, right, says, this is, if I remember correctly, in the Rashi on Samach Zayin Amud Aleph. Aval im michteach lapras shel tavshil. I have to let me read that Rashi quickly, and then let's see if we can find it. And maybe that'd be a good place to go into the break with. So this is the Rashi on where does he start? Kol shetamo mashol velokin alav v'zeu kezayit b'chtei achilat pras. It's the last Rashi on Samach Zayin Amud Aleph. Right, and I may skip all the things about like the Beit Menuga if I remember correctly that's in there.
It's right there in the beginning. It's right there in the beginning.
Yeah. Ve'al kegonze ne'emar shir kezayit b'chtei achilat pras halacha leMoshe miSinai. All right. This is right. It's a received tradition. This is she'im yesh bekashir pras shel tavshil kezayit mina isur. All right. Lokin alav afal pi she'en kezayit shel isur nechal bevat echad. All right. So if in this, right, you don't actually have to. Yeah, you're right. So you would not actually have to eat all of this if there is within a achilat pras in the amount of this total substance that you would eat in, let's say, 6 minutes. Let's say I'm going to make that right. If there's a kazayit of isur, you get lashes for eating it, even if you don't eat a kazayit all at once, right, in one go. Kevan de'eno shohe b'achilato mishit chil lo'ochlo ad shigamaro. All right,
No,
because
that's called one eating. In other
yeah,
words, you're eating it in one sitting, so you're effectively eating it at once, even though it's not at once.
mhm.
It's effectively at once.
Yeah. Ela kedei achilat pras mistarefet achilato velo ke. Right.
So it sounds like you have to eat the whole thing, not just a kazayit, even more. Sounds like you have to eat enough. There's three possibilities. One is a mashu, one is a kazayit, and one is enough of the whole thing that you got a kazayit of isser.
That's the way I understood.
I think that the kazayit of isser is consumed in the time it would take to eat half a loaf of bread.
Yeah.
Which means, and if the ratio of this mixture is a kazayit of isser to a half a loaf of bread, then you're gonna have to eat a half a loaf of bread.
Then you have to eat the whole thing, right? Yes. So
You have to eat enough to guarantee that you actually imbibed, consumed that whole kazayit.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Or in other words, it's trying to it's trying to be parallel to if I took a bite of pork and chewed it and swallowed it, and that bite was a kazayit, I would get malchut on that bite of pork. Now, what if pork fell into a tavshil? How much of that tavshil in how short an amount of time do I have to eat to be equivalent to eating a bite of pork? And if I have a bite of that tavshil and then put it away and then come back to the fridge 6 hours later and eat another bite, I don't get malchut.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to eat enough kazaytim of that in order that in all those kazaytim you had a pork and you had to do it in a certain amount of time. So what if it's 1 in 60? If it's 1 in 50, let's say, then
you're never gonna be low. I mean, it'd
be very unlikely that you could eat enough of it in a kedei achilas pras. It would be achila gasa. It would be shoving it down your throat. It wouldn't count. So you would never be usher. You would never get malchus if it's more than this ratio.
But it would still be asur, of course, right? Per the second statement.
You'd never get whipping. Yes.
You just you wouldn't. Now, and whether or not, right, and that's the whole question is does that mean
we got 3 levels? We got 3 levels. Wait, we got 3 levels. We got more than 60 mutter, less than 60 usur, but no whipping. And then if you're at this very high ratio of a kazayik b'kedei achilat pras, then you get actual whipping.
Mm-hmm. So, the idea, and this is actually an interesting question here. Maybe before we go to break, we'll end with this. Is at least the way I'm seeing it is really a question of what is achila in its most fundamental level. Does it require hana'ah of some sort, right? Does it require some sort? You got something not good out of it, whatever that may be, which is what we're talking about. Like, have I eaten, right? The Torah says, lo tochlu, right? You don't eat these things. All right, what does that mean? Did I get hana'ah out of it? Did I eat it as a meal, essentially, right? Rashi says, right, if I keep going in the Rashi, he says, ho'il v'shohe be'achilato kezayit yoter mich'dei achilat pras, havu lahu k'shtei achilot shel shnei yamim ve'en lokim, right? That's, did I actually eat it as like one meal, or was this something spread out over time? Like, almost to put it as like something I was just like picking at, but I didn't actually sit down and eat enough isur. And so all of these will kind of come into a more fundamental question of when did I actually violate the terms of being asur, and also more deeply in terms of pagam, right? It might even be the case that in some of these cases it might be, it's not mutar, but it's not actually punishable, or it's not mutar d'oraita. And in some cases it might be, it's actually just mutar lechatchila completely. Like lechatchila is a bad term to use because I've accidentally dropped the isur into the thing. But at that point in time, it now is a mutar substance to eat. So I think with that, maybe it's a good time to go for break. What do you think, Shani? Even though, sorry, we didn't see the Tosfot yet, but
we'll see Tosfot after break.
We'll take 5 minutes. Is that? And then
based on now what we've seen about his reading of this pasuk, does he think Notin Tam Gam is always asur?
I think
Go ahead, Gabby.
I think he might say that it's always a sul if the eating the thing itself is a sul, then it's always a sul. And he says like this cow that's like got this horrible disease is like eating dirt. It's not, you're allowed to eat dirt, you just wouldn't do it. And therefore, if it falls in your soup, you're like, if dirt falls in your soup, you're also allowed to eat it because you're allowed to eat dirt.
So what would Rabbi Shimon say to that, Yavni?
I think he would say that no, you're not allowed to eat. I mean, I think he says that he thinks that he doesn't accept this. He doesn't bring in this category of a cow that is equivalent to dirt.
No, Rabbi Shimon's the one who calls it like ether, or afar. But I think the difference is is that Rabbi Shimon would also say it's permitted, but he just doesn't think that's what the pasuk is talking about because he thinks the pasuk didn't even need to tell you about that. So it would imply that both of them think that's permitted. So Rabbi Shimon thinks that that's like so pshita that like the pasuk wouldn't even have to tell you that.
In terms of permitted, we should say what it's permitted for, meaning it's permitted as not a nevela. It's still not permitted to eat because it didn't undergo proper shchita.
Right. So there's a sort of like multiple layers of what's happening here. We've said in the context of the pasuk, it's a nevela, meaning you can't eat it, if it's something that you can't eat but you would give to a ger. It's not even in a nevela, says Rabbi Shimon. It doesn't even fall into the category of nevela if the ger wouldn't eat it. So in that case, if it falls in your soup, well, like go for it, because it's not even in the category of something that's considered asur. Joel and I had a whole back and forth. Thanks, Isaac. Joel and I had a whole back and forth when we were learning this material of does Rabbi Shimon's position imply that actually, if the ger wouldn't even eat that nevela, could I take a bite out of the nevela? I think absolutely not, and I think that that Rashi's language as well seems to indicate like, no, we're still talking about a tarobet. Like, keep in mind that we're still talking about if this thing fell. Like, we're always, whenever we're in kashrut land, we're in b'diavad land. Wherever we're in kashrut land, we're in the thing fell into the thing, and now what do I do? So all of that machloket should be considered sort of within that context. But Joel, I don't know, Joel, if you want to offer disagreement or where you've come to.
I don't know. Maybe someone will, but I think from the words here, it sounds like Rabbi Shimon would make the argument that if it's like a nevela and it became, listen, I don't want to say it started out mashbiach making gross. I don't want to get into that. Like, let's just say, like a gross nevela, it's disgusting tasting, might be mutar to eat. Like it's not. And you could also go the other way, which is like it's not asur because like no one would ever eat it. Also, but I'd say it's not achila, it's not food.
This reminds me of conversations about like shampoo on Pesach that has oatmeal in it or something like that. That I think the language is re'oi lekelev, and there's some kind of story about someone saying, "Oh, my dog ate my shampoo once," and some great Rav, I don't remember who, says, "Well, just because your dog is crazy doesn't mean we can't keep this shampoo in our house." So I don't know if there's another category of usage that isn't eating, but there's essentially in that case you're basically saying of course you're not going to eat the shampoo, so now the question is just whether it's in the category of chametz and you can't have it in your house. So I don't know in the case of nevela if there is some other way of saying it is not actually nevela because it is AvodaZara, but it's just so obvious that you wouldn't eat it. So now it's more of a theoretical conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's really helpful in sort of like opening the question when we say ru'uya leger, right, or ru'uya lenochri, right? If our foundational principle is this pasuk that says that thing that's the nevela, it's still something you would give to a non-Jew. But what does it mean that it's ra'ui? Does it mean that's something that is technically edible, right? Not totally inedible. Or does it mean your average ger would be like, oh, thanks, a steak, right? Which actually have two very different sort of then interpretive chains that go with them. And I actually think that maps on quite nicely to the question of sort of the overall machloket between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Meir here. For Rabbi Shimon, when I say ra'ui leger, what I mean is, right, as long as they, let's see if I'm gonna get this right. Right, basically for Rabbi Shimon, if something is even a little pagum, just like, right, when Rashi was sort of making that little kimta on Reish Lakish, right, when we say noten tam lifgam is mutar, when we say noten tam lifgam is mutar, we mean like it just tastes bad. We don't mean inedible. To which Rabbi Meir would say, I disagree. Rabbi Meir would say, the thing that would make something so not ra'oi leger that it would make it okay for me is if the thing had shchin, the ger wouldn't touch it. Right, so even though this machloket is framed as Rabbi Shimon says, Rosh Hashanah Mifgam is asur, and right, Rabbi Meir thinks Rosh Hashanah Mifgam is mutar, I really think ultimately, like I said, like this is a question of goalposts. Meaning when Rabbi Meir hears the words noten tam lifgam mutar, he hears, I'm gonna serve my cholent when something fell into it that doesn't taste so good, but like my neighbor would eat it. And that's absolutely unacceptable to me, says Rabbi Meir. We can't eat that. We could only eat that if that thing that fell into my soup, if I offered a big hunk of it to my, neighbor Christopher would be like, no thanks, like, no thanks. Right? And that's the only circumstance under which Rabbi Shimon would say, yeah, pagum, so pagum, it's not even the category of pagum anymore, and therefore mutar. Lexi, you had a reaction.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think like potentially in that framing, one could argue that like functionally Rabbi Meir says noten tam lifgam asur, in the sense that maybe Rabbi Meir's like threshold for like what's pogim is so high that it's actually things people like mamish wouldn't eat, as opposed to like some of these other like languages we have of pogim are like, it's not great, like you don't love it, it like, makes the flavor of the thing less good, but like, if you spend a lot of money on that thing or you're really hungry, like you would eat it, as opposed to like maybe Rabbi Meir's standard of pogim is so pogim that like literally you can barely conceive of a human eating it, to the extent that like functionally he's saying noten tam lifgam is asur. Which is still saying the same thing as you, it's just like, depending on how, I guess, we read how actionable they think these things are. Also, this is not relevant, but just out of curiosity, I looked it up, and the Tosfot on AvodaZara in 76 do hold like Rashi that from Ibort Surah, that from like Kodshim, about how some of them, like they're called Ibort Surah when it's left overnight, that Ben Yomo just needs to be left the full night.
76, you said? Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, I'm noting that we have 5 minutes, and I'm going to let this conversation like go a little bit longer, and we're not going to get to the rest of the Gemara you prepared, which like basically when we get to in the halachic like literature, things on noten tam lifgam and timing, meaning like starts pagum and then gets better, or starts good and then gets pagum, come back to the sugya. But I think it's worth taking a few more comments in this vein. Yavni, yeah.
I want to argue against the framing that it's about how bad it makes it, because I think the approach is different. I think one approach is to say this is about like the interaction of the thing with the food that you're eating and what it does to the food that you're eating, as opposed to Rabbi Meir, which seems focused on what is the status of the thing that fell in. Like, is the thing gross in and of itself?
Well, I think they're both concerned with that, right? Because Rabbi Shimon himself, we started this conversation by saying, Rabbi Shimon, where do you learn the noten tam lifgam is mutar? Oh, I learned it because I learned it from nevela. And the question of whether this nevela is nevela or this nevela is like not even really in the category of nevela that's super usher. So I think they both, at least in this piece of the conversation, are functioning in that frame.
Fair enough.
But I think you can make the argument for Yavni's interpretation that still in that first case, the moment the novella was first in novella, it didn't have that, and then something's happening to it also that it's rotting. So it's not like it's not inherent in the thing, it's sort of going bad, as opposed to the moment that the animal dies, it's always pagam. So there's like this inherent essence that they're always connected. So it's also how I was reading it.
Yeah, you definitely, I think that's definitely like there on the surface level. And I think one of the things that sort of clued me into wondering if sort of we can think about it more broadly is in our last piece of the sugya on that pagam porta, right? When we get Rabbi Meir's response position, which is like, you know, that bat yoma pot that the Torah said is not okay. Don't tell me it's not pagum at all. It's a little pagum, right? It's a little bit pagum. And if it's a little bit pagum, it's still usher. Whereas you, Rabbi Shimon, would be willing to tell me if it's a little bit pagum, it's mutar.
I do think that the time factor here has come back. Rashi definitely is going to read this into it. He's channeling Ulo, which we're going to, comes next. But like the fact that it says mi'ikara, we're talking about Bachit, right? It's like there is, and also even more so, I think, right? Is ena kriya nevela. Like once there's the shame of an Isser on it, that's really where the discussion, like, if it has the shame of an Isser and then becomes pagum, is it still an Isur? Is like one of the big questions that's here. And I think that time does actually really, as more than even so much than extent, it's like really a question of time. Like, could you have ever said this was an Isur or not?
Fair. Fair, but I stand my ground. All right, I want to take the last minute just to like plant a question, which is, we started this year saying, remember that thing called Tom that we thought was the big problem? Not so much of a problem once there's no Hana'a involved, maybe. And then we get some pushback on that, and we're sort of in the middle of that debate. Just want to plant the question, why does this matter? Meaning, what does it say about our system of Isur v'heter? What does it say about what's mutar and what's asur in this system? If something suddenly flips from mutar, from asur to mutar, if at some level I'm not enjoying it anymore, or the thing becomes bad. I think there are a lot of different ways to frame that. We don't have time to talk about it together today, but maybe just to chew on, I'll allow that to be the pun that it is. Just to sit with over the next week, just to think about like, where does this discussion leave me in terms of what I think this whole system is about and what it is we're doing here in trying to build our system of food laws and what we're allowed and not allowed to consume. So I'll leave us with that. We're at 4 o'clock. Thank you so much to you all and to Rev Landis and Rev.
Thank you very much.
Bye to you guys. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, to both of you. Thank you all very much.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
all.
Shani. Enjoy.
Not so far, everybody. Yeah, it's like,
See you all next year.
Very good.
We have Shiur next
Not
week,
so
yeah?
bad.
Shiur next Monday.
Som Gedalia, right? So.
Yeah.
Yes, sure. On next week, courtesy of Rabbi Landis.
Okay, excellent.
Good thing I'm not going to show. No, I actually am going to one of those. My mother has a neighborhood minyan. So if I walk out her dining room door, I'm there in the minyan. Okay.